Hey, today we're going to be talking about central nervous system depressants, hypnotics, sedatives, and we're going to be covering those. And I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the history of them too. So, what is a central nervous system depressant and why is it problematic? Usually, physicians, this is always under a physician's direction most of the time, and it's the second most frequently abused prescription drug and sometimes contributes to people's death. They accidentally overdose on it. And you might say, how would someone accidentally overdose on a central nervous system depressant? And if you're thinking about it, you'll know that with central nervous system depressants, they cannot be combined with other drugs because it ups it. And if you get to the point where something's depressed, you will stop breathing. You will stop, your heartbeat will stop. So one of the big things that people do is they combined it with other drugs. Like what happened with Heath Ledger. You can look in your book and it does a little good description of what happened to him. Do you know what happened? He probably most likely accidentally overdosed with alcohol and a central nervous system depressant. When you combine them together, the two are a deadly combination. So central nervous system depressants were used as a way to try to find another way besides alcohol to suppress the system. Bromides were introduced to treat nervousness and anxiety, nervousness and anxiety in the 1800s. And then the early 1900s, bromides were replaced by barbiturates. Now, here's the problem with barbiturates. They can be pretty problematic. And we're going to be talking about barbiturates. They can actually get a person's central nervous system so down, so low, the central nervous system gets depressed so much that they stop breathing altogether. So what came into really becoming popular was in the 1950s. This was the first benzodiazepines were first marketed as a substitute for barbiturates. Again, if you read up on barbiturates worked great, but they would sedate someone so much they would stop breathing. But benzodiazepines would not do that. It would not depress the system as much. And so they were considered pretty safe and really used. But the problem is that they started to get prescribed a lot. Benzodiazepines were prescribed a lot. And if you look up benzodiazepines, and let's see where it is in your book. I'm turning now to chapter 6 in my book. It might be a different chapter than your book. But the diazepams, benzodiazepines are on page 180. Look at the table, and you'll get to see the different half-lives of benzodiazepines. And you'll probably recognize some of these names. Lorazepam, triazolam, and you'll see all these different names of Valium. There's another name for diazepam, which is Valium. You'll hear people say, take a Valium and relax. Well, diazepams relax people because it pushes down their central nervous system. And what's interesting is that twice as many women as men take them. But let's talk about the history of this and why diazepams were really pushed into with women taking them a little bit more. They're classified as a Schedule IV drug, so that means that they can be used for medical purposes, but they can be abused. So I'm going to play this song for you, and we'll see if you recognize it. Mother's Little Helper. Do you recognize this song? Running for the shelter of a mother's little helper. So what's that mother's little helper? If you said diazepam or you said Valium, it was prescribed to women who were, this was after World War II, and a lot of women were working during World War II, and then they got put back into the household, and we had a lot of industrialization, and a lot of things started to get automated, and so women started to become very anxious because they were used to working and being out there, and now they were told stay home. So what doctors started doing when she overreacts to any situation, they would start prescribing diazepams. And you start thinking about this, those can be addictive, right? Addictive. And so women were starting to get that, prescribed that. You can't set her free, but you can help her feel less anxious. These are real advertisements that were out there for women who were feeling anxious, and they were being prescribed central nervous system depressants. Calm down. Calm down. Don't get so hyper. Don't get so worked up. Here, have a Valium. That's where it comes from. Yes, as I read that, as I say that out loud, it sounds very annoying, but it's the truth, and it's out there, and it's one of those things that came part of our use of drugs was to calm people down who were anxious here. So the Rolling Stones actually wrote a song about it. And with that, we started to get the overuse of diazepam. Again, the second most abused drug. So what are the effects of central nervous system depressants? So as this drug is getting pushed out there, pushed and pushed, it can include all the central nervous system depressant activities, and it starts to push the level of activity down. So within the central nervous system depressants, I just was talking about benzodiazepines, which is on page 180 is a list of them. It also includes barbiturate-like drugs, and so you'll see that there are other drugs that are listed. So page 182 is our barbiturates, which are more dangerous than benzodiazepines, but you need to know about those. You've also probably heard of a drug called Rofinol, which is roofies. It's a club drug that really knocks people out and they completely forget. That's what happens with central nervous system depressants. When they get very strong, people start to forget things. And then we have antihistamines, which have an anticholinergic effect, which means it actually bonds and prohibits the uptake of acetylcholine. So what that does is it actually starts to depress our central nervous system too. So, for example, like antihistamines, like, can you think of one? Like Benadryl? So these are all central nervous system depressants, okay? Really important for you to read your book in this section. If you read your book, and as I go through these different types of central nervous system depressants, you'll see that it begins on page 178. I just mentioned the benzodiazepines, which starts on, which are Valium type drugs. Then it moves to other types of drugs, which are Rofinol, and then we move to barbiturates, and then I move to other central nervous system depressants. So become familiar with those. Make sure you read that whole section. So the big thing about central nervous system depressants is they do two things. They are sedatives that called mild depression and relax, and they relieve anxiety, okay? They relieve anxiety. And the other thing they do is they're hypnotics. They include drowsiness and they encourage sleep. And they also have this amnesia effect that I mentioned where people actually forget things, okay? So they can actually have different effects. So at low doses, they're sedatives. At higher doses, they're hypnotics, and they actually put people to sleep. And at even higher doses, they become anesthetics in the sense that they actually, in the end, they're used for surgery. Okay, so anesthesia, where they actually put someone out completely so they don't feel pain. So those are three big things. So here is a nice little chart for you. At low doses, they reduce anxiety, and at higher doses, they can be used to treat insomnia. They can be used for surgery, and then inadvertently, they can be overdosed, where people are combining central nervous system depressants with another central nervous system depressant, and then we have someone stop breathing, and then we have a fatal overdose. So I talked to you about a little bit about how they could be prescribed in abuse. So you can see what the medical uses of benzodiazepines are, which is to reduce anxiety. You can see the types of them on page 180, like I said before. And you can see that they can be addictive. One of the things that benzodiazepines can be used is to also wean people off of other addictions. So, for example, with alcohol, one of the prescriptions that is used to wean people off of alcohol are benzodiazepines, Valium. But you can see how that could be fatal for an alcoholic. So a doctor could be prescribing a Valium to get them off of alcohol, but if they drink alcohol and take Valium, they will die. It's a lethal combination. So again, look at the different types of Valium type drugs. We have benzodiazepines, and I go over those. And then this is how they work. They affect the neurons that have receptors for the neurotransmitter GABA. Remember GABA? Remember in the very first chapter, I asked you to look at the different types of neurotransmitter? GABA is the most common inhibitor transmitter in the brain. It alters mood, it causes drowsiness, and it makes people relax. So when the GABA is being released in the brain, that's the effect it has. What central nervous system does, central nervous system depressants do, is they actually block the uptake so more GABA can be released into the system. So if someone has more GABA in their blood system, and so they start to have this drowsiness effect. So what you need to know is that you need to know that there are different versions of this, low versions and high versions, and the more we push and we block the uptake, the more our body starts to relax. So another one I mentioned to you is Rufinol, and roofies, as you might have heard people talk about, and it was outlawed in the United States. Have you heard of someone being roofied? That's when someone's put this inadvertently in someone's drink, and then later it's been tied to date rape and abuse because this person doesn't remember it. Right? That's, again, the hypnotic effect, that sleepiness effect, that amnesia effect at high dosage. The next one that's mentioned in your book are barbiturates. So this is not a benzodiazepine, okay? This is not. But it has a central nervous system effect and is the next group of drugs in the central nervous system depressants. And barbiturates play an important role as a sedative hypnotic. But the problem with barbiturates is that it has side effect of nausea and death. So we can see that barbiturates are not commonly used. And again, what is commonly used? If you said benzodiazepine, you're right. That's what the first class of drugs I talked about. But barbiturates were first used. But unfortunately, they can kill people, so that is not a good thing. We don't want to relax someone so much to the point where they stop breathing. So barbiturates are difficult to control. So there are other drugs that have barbiturate-like properties, okay? Chlorohydrate, methylpyrrolone, you've heard of quailone, methylqualones, quaaludes. So these are things that actually also have very similar barbiturate-like properties. I mentioned antihistamines, right? Like Benadryl, they have central nervous system depressants. And then propofol. And propofol is something that, if you look at page 187, has a barbiturate-like effect, again, reducing a person's ability to breathe, has an anesthetic ability where it actually puts someone into an altered state. And this was used on Michael Jackson, and it was used too much. The doctor he was supposed to be monitored, and it knocked him out to the point where he stopped breathing. Okay, so these are all central nervous system depressants. It is used by the American Psychiatric Association, and it's considered, it can be used for psychiatric disorders. Let's talk about people who are most likely going to abuse central nervous system depressants. Again, this is a big class of drugs. It's not one type of drug, it's a big class of drugs. So, in your mind, let's list them. What are central nervous system depressants? If you said benzodiazepines, the whole group of Valium-like drugs, you're right. If you said barbiturates, you're right. If you said roofies, you're right. If you said antihistamines, you're right. If you said the drug that killed Michael Jackson, propofol, you're right. Okay? So the people who are most likely to abuse these are people who are really constantly in stress, want to feel euphoria, and also get that depressant feeling. Use depressants to counteract the unpleasant effects of other drug abuse. So for example, someone who's addicted to alcohol, Valium is used to get them off of alcohol. You could easily see that someone coming off of alcohol could easily get addicted to Valium too, as they're trying to get off of alcohol, okay? And then people who use alcohol and heroin to enhance these effects. So sometimes people will actually, yes, take a Valium and drink wine. I actually heard a comedian joke about that one time, that I forgot her name, she's a blonde anyway, she was joking about how she'll take a Valium and drink some wine at night. Well, that is a deadly combination, and it also starts to amp the body up for addiction. So not good to do those two things. We talked about detoxification, and one of the things that is trying to wean people off of it. The big thing about central nervous system depressants is they're highly physically addictive. And remember, physically addictive is when the body actually stops producing the neurotransmitter that it needs to produce. And so when someone all of a sudden stops taking the drug, they go into withdrawals, and then they could actually die if they don't get weaned off of it. So people can't suddenly just say, I'm going to stop taking Valium. I'm going to stop taking this drug. They can actually die. And so they need to be physically weaned off of it. They have to be detoxified. They need to go through detoxification. So I want to ask this question to you. Do you think propofol should be scheduled, the drug that killed Michael Jackson? If so, what category would you schedule this drug? Why do benzo drugs replace barbiturates as the sedative hypnotic drug most prescribed? Why did benzo drugs replace barbiturates? I've said it a few times in this session, so you need to make sure that you know that. And if you answered that barbiturates could be fatal, then you're right. They're hard to control, and so that's why benzo drugs were brought in. Do you think benzo drugs are being overprescribed now? That is a typo. Ugh, I hate typos. Have they in the past, and it's not when, but W-H-E-N, when have they been overprescribed in the past? And currently, FDA allows sleep aids. Do you think they should be regulated? All right. Should they be regulated? So I'm going to go ahead and put these up as discussion questions for this week and see if you guys can knock those out. And that's the end of my slideshow. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that when. I always find a typo when I'm doing this. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And what I'm going to have you do now is I'm going to, I want to make sure that you know what you need to do this week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a discussion question, and it's going to be those discussion questions that I covered in the PowerPoint. That's what I'm going to do this week. And it's going to be worth 10 points altogether. You'd knock out this discussion question. And what's really, really super important is that you post by the end of the week so that we actually have discussion. All right? So you'll be seeing that. And I will be having it in here. I'm going to put it right in here. Discussion post, I'm putting in right now. And right there, boom. I want to see what you guys think about this. New topic, discussion post. And on central nervous system depressants. And I'm going to make it 10 points. Okay? Total of 10 points this time. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing your discussion post. And hey, anytime you see a typo in anything, if you Canvas message me, I will give you extra credit. This also shows me that you actually listened to this lecture too. All right. Great. Thank you. Have a great week.